Hi, I'm Steve Clapham. Welcome to the Behind the Balance Sheet podcast, where we meet leading investors and commentators and educate ourselves about the world of investing and the world at large. Our mission is to remove some of the mystique around investing and improve our understanding of what makes a successful investment or indeed an unsuccessful one. Our goal is to inform, educate, and entertain. We hope you enjoy this and every episode.
Behind the Balance Sheet and affiliates and podcast guests may own shares or have an economic interest in securities discussed in this podcast, which is aired for your education and entertainment only. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice or relied upon for investment decisions. Always do your own research.
Lionel Barber is the former editor of the Financial Times and probably the only journalist on the planet to have interviewed Presidents Obama, Trump, and Putin. Under his stewardship, the FT metamorphosed from a newspaper into a digital subscription business and was sold to the Japanese company Nikkei for 44 times earnings. And as editor, Barber fully backed up our former guest Dan McCrum in his investigation of Wcard. I was delighted when Lionel agreed to come on the show to talk about his new book, Gambling Man, a biography of Masa Son, the founder of Softbank and creator of the $100 billion Vision Fund. I've long been curious about Son, who, for 3 days at the peak of the dot-com boom, was the richest man in the world. Barber spent 3 years writing his meticulously researched book, for which he interviewed 150 people, including Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, as he explains in our discussion. Some of his stories, including his description of Son's inner sanctum, are just marvellous. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure you will too. So Lionel, listen, thank you for coming on. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you. And you've written this amazing book about Masa Son, and you dedicated the book to Kita-san, who I guess is the chairman of Nikkei.
He was the man that did the deal from Nikkei to buy the Financial Times for $1.3 billion. By the way, that's 44 times earnings. And he was my counterpart at Nikkei, an inspirational figure. And I did 14 trips to Japan as editor in 4 years. And I decided he is the man I want to dedicate the book to.
And did you love Japan?
I did. My twin brother actually is married to a Japanese a lady, almost 40 years. And he lived in Japan for 5 years during the bubble in the late 1980s when the real estate market went through the roof. But I never went to Japan until 1996. And then I made a number of visits, and obviously latterly when the Nikkei bought the FT, and I became much more interested. I my twin brother and I have a rather competitive relationship.
No.
So I decided that I would specialize in America in the West while he specialized in the East.
And what did you like about Japan? Well,
it's so subtle. I mean, you think that you understand a little bit and you probably only get 2%. I mean, I don't speak the Japanese language. I always used an interpreter. But what I did do was look at people, listen to the intonation. Do you know what the worst thing that can happen to you in Japan if you're in a conversation, Stephen?
I have no idea.
If they laugh, because then they're embarrassed and you've really screwed up if they laugh.
Oh, see, that's interesting. I mean, my experience has been restricted to people falling asleep.
Well, the jet lag is appalling, and I've done that almost the same. But I also think that the Japanese this is a great civilization. Yeah. I mean, it goes back centuries. They're an island nation, the archipelago. They were shut off from the rest of the world for centuries and only really modernized in the late 19th century. And that, by the way, is when the Japanese empire really took off. They became the greatest power in Asia. You know what happened with the Second World War, but that's where the Koreans came to Japan in the turn of the century, and that's where Masa's father and grandmother came. Grandfather came in 1917, grandmother came in around 1927 or so. They met, and that's so they're Koreans in Japan. That's very important to understand Masa's psychology as an
because
outsider.
he's an outsider. But what made you write a book about Masa Son? Because you like politics, and so I'd assumed that the book you wrote after the diaries would have been a political book. What drove you to write this book?
Simple adage in journalism: follow the money. If you are looking at an empire like Softbank's, where they created a $100 billion vision fund, the richest man in the world, Masa was, for 3 days in height of the dot-com bubble in 2000. But he's a mystery. So I figured, one, there's got to be lots of great stories if there's that amount of money involved. Two, this is a story of our times. It's about riding this technological wave that has transformed our societies. So for those reasons and the sort of cracking the mystery of Masayoshi Son, that was my motivation.
But in your diaries, you wrote that Son had agreed to do lunch with FT, which I always love. And he shook hands on it in front of Google's Larry Page, but he evaded it. You wrote, he understood that his power lay in his mystique, hence no formal interviews. And you visited Tokyo twice, only for him to cancel meetings. I mean, was he just maintaining the mystique?
Well, I did 6 trips to Japan, and twice he said he was too busy. That was between 2022 and 2023. I mean, initially, when I said I was going to do the book, SoftBank was distinctly unenthusiastic, and they didn't really want this book. And go to your point, Stephen, he is somebody who wraps himself in mystique. He doesn't open up. He's very, very private. He's got these incredible properties around the world. When I said I was going to write about them, I mean, they almost had collective heart attack. He's somebody who, on the surface, is modest, but in private, when he talks about himself, compares himself to Napoleon and Genghis Khan, and then he has, I mean, it's incredible. So you know, unraveling the mystery was very important to me, and finding out the man's motivation. Is he a great investor? Is he just lucky? We'll probably talk about that.
Yeah, I think we've probably got that conclusion already, but a bit of that. You know, the book's amazingly well researched, and you interviewed an amazing cast of characters, from Son himself through Bill Gates, Michael Moritz, Bill Gurley, and even Warren Buffett. And you over like a 2-year period. So, I mean, it took you a huge amount of time.
Yeah, more than 3 years. Yeah, I interviewed more than 150 people, a lot of people in America, a lot of people in Silicon Valley. And yes, Warren Buffett did agree to have an exchange about this extraordinary trip that Masa paid.
I was amazed to read that Warren Buffett had met Son in his office in Omaha on a Sunday.
Yeah.
To my mind, Warren Buffett and Masa Son are polar opposites. Mr. Buffett hates debt. He's for a long time held a cash pile of over $100 billion. Son used to have almost twice that in debt. I mean, SoftBank still has about that in debt. And in spite of having much, much smaller cash flows than Berkshire, Buffett's letters are full of wisdom, whereas Son sometimes comes out with, just things that you cannot he appears to talk nonsense. My question is, why do you think Buffett agreed to meet with Son? And why did Son imagine that Warren Buffett would invest in the Vision Fund? I mean, it's just like ludicrous.
There might have been a little bit of curiosity on the part of Warren Buffett, but you're absolutely right. These men belong to different galaxies.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett invests in real businesses like Gillette, like Burlington, and the railway stock. Yeah. But he is not averse to making big financial bets. If you remember what he did with Goldman Sachs and the banks, where he that was a very astute, quick, tactical investment. Now, he arguably missed the tech wave. I mean, he only invested in Apple late. Masa has invested, and this is where the contrast is, right at the beginning. I mean, he invested in Yahoo in 1995. Yeah. He invested in Alibaba at the end of 1999. By the way, if he hadn't made that bet, he really would have gone down fully. So you're definitely right. I think it was polite, but remember, Stephen, The meeting lasted barely 20 minutes in his office. He took them for a little tour around Berkshire Hathaway, he said, I'm just making a few pennies, on the cash pile. And then Masa made one pitch for the Vision Fund, and then he tried to get Warren Buffett to invest in Sprint. That is which was in real trouble, by the way. And Buffett basically said, I don't do regulated businesses like that. No, thanks very much, and bye-bye.
Yeah, no cash flow. But it was just seemed a bizarre thing for Son to try. And I wondered what the psychology was behind it. What did Buffett say? Because you interviewed Buffett.
I did. I mean, Warren Buffett was quite careful about what he actually said. But there's an important element in this book that Masa tried to emulate part of the Warren Buffett strategy, which is, and it's all to do with permanent capital. If you've got insurance companies with a lot of cash, you can then use that to leverage for other investments. Now, Warren Buffett's done it to a degree, but nothing like what Masa had in mind. And that's why Masa looked at buying Swiss Re, and I think he looked at one or two other insurance companies. I think he looked at, he even looked at Aviva.
All right. Well,
what about that?
Yeah.
But this was all about getting a huge amount of capital on which you could leverage then investing bets. And when these insurance companies, that didn't come off, that's why he went to the Gulf to get money, permanent capital from the Saudis and then the Emiratis, which was 60 billion, by the way.
And why did Warren Buffett agree to be interviewed by you? Because he's famously difficult to get at. Is it just because you're the former editor of the FT and you're writing the book about Son, or?
Well, I go to Sun Valley, the Allen and Company Media Conference, every year. I've seen Mr. Buffett there, and I know people who know Warren Buffett very well, and I very politely asked him whether I could have an exchange about Masa Son, and I'd gathered that there'd been this visit. So we had a brief verbal exchange, and then he said, if you send me an email, and by the way, he doesn't look at email, he has an assistant.
Yes, Debbie prints them out.
Debbie, yeah. And I sent the email, and then I got a response. So I was able to use that material. But I also did interview somebody else who was in the meeting in Omaha, so I got a second account.
Oh, interesting. Well, you've interviewed everybody. So what do people like Moritz and Gurley, the great...
Oh, they hate him.
Why do they hate him?
Because they think he's, a money-grubbing, aggressive. He was the one who turned their party upside down. He destroyed value. He threw money at all these founded companies. He wasn't really interested in growing a company and working with management. He threatened them. He said, if you don't invest, and then he invested in the competitor like Lyft and Uber.
Yeah.
I mean, he sent them crazy. Bill Gurley said it was just an absolute nightmare dealing with them. And also then Masa employed people in the Vision Fund who were very arrogant. They were former traders, and they kind of walked into the Silicon Valley offices vaping, putting their feet on the desk. And I talked, when I made a number of visits to Silicon Valley, to the venture VC firms, and several of them said, what is it? These guys blowing smoke? I mean, what is this? But when you've got 100 billion in your coffers, it tends to make you a little bit arrogant.
Yes, well, I can see there's no shortage of arrogance.
Hubris as well.
Yeah. Masa's a fascinating character, isn't he? I mean, I thought the most curious snippet in your book was he missed his own wedding, and then the ceremony was rescheduled for a week later, and he was late for it. I mean, what kind of a person does that?
Well, he's very, very focused on things. And in this instance, this was when he was a student at Berkeley, California. And he, via a nuclear particle physicist, who I tracked down, by the way, when he was 92.
Wow.
And I found Dr. Forrest Mosa, and he described this incident. They were developing this speech synthesizer, and Masa was so focused on the deadline that he completely forgot that he had a wedding that afternoon. And suddenly somebody said, have you not got something important? Oh, my God. And he gets in his second-hand Porsche and roars down the hill from the Space Sciences lab at Berkeley and of course, he's several hours late, and his bride is literally left waiting at the altar, where it's a registry office. So, the next week he was still working on the product. So that's what he's incredibly, details focused, obsessive.
He's still married to the same woman.
That's a little tricky, Stephen. I knew you were going to get into that. They're very sensitive about privacy. I think you'll find that there's a different arrangement. Let me say that.
Okay, no, we won't.
I have to be very careful because he's very jealous about his privacy. And I took a view, Stephen, and I'm being very candid here, that rather than going into all the detail about what his living arrangements are and whatever, that I would respect that element of privacy in return for writing about things that he would definitely be deeply uncomfortable about, his insane risk-taking and his business ventures and his conflict of interest and the role of whistleblowers in the company going back 25 years, blah, blah, blah. I just took a view.
It would be unusual for him to have a very quiet personal life when he's got that. Or I suppose one could have, but it doesn't matter.
Well, sorry, I can talk about his love affair with dogs.
Yes.
I mean, teacup poodles.
We'll come to the dogs. But the other thing I thought was really funny was Nikkei Arora, one of his team, beat him at table tennis. And he then employed a former Japanese Olympian player to instruct him. I mean, is this an obsession with winning and winning everything? Absolutely,
Stephen. You've identified one of the key driving things. He constantly talks about being number one, and I have this story which is my favorite sports story, that Henry Kravis, the co-founder of KKR, Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, the private equity billionaire, invited Masa, who's a very, very keen golfer, to play at Augusta, the famous course in America. And Masa, I don't know whether he shot par, but he did very well and beat Kravis. And Kravis said, "You've obviously played this course before." And he said, "No, I haven't." He said, "No, you have. You know all this and that." And Masa then said, "No, I've played it in my basement," because he has an artificial golf course in his basement in central Tokyo. He also, by the way, can take a 75-mile-hour fastball in baseball. That's the other sport. Yes. So he's very competitive, and a ruthless negotiator.
Really? Because it strikes me that he never negotiates. He just, whatever you ask him for,
he'll pay more. I mean, Herman Narula of Improbable went to Tokyo and he was in search of £50 million for his an investment, and he came back with 500 million. He didn't know what to do with it. I mean, Masa, people say he pays over the odds. He looks at it differently. He says, well, what's this asset going to be in 3 or 4 years' time? He has a slightly different time frame. And he pays more because it's a status symbol. I can afford to pay. And you mentioned Nikkei Arora, the ex-Google executive, the number 4 there, the chief revenue officer. Masa hired him. I mean, ridiculous. Nikesh told me about this scene in the Japanese restaurant where they're negotiating his pay package. And it's all being done on a napkin. And zeros are being added with brackets. It ended up $320 million guaranteed over 4 years with it was $80 million a year. Now, can you imagine, in terms of businesses, for Japanese, they weren't earning anything like that. So that was a bit of a culture shock inside Softbank between the Japanese side and the American or Indian recruits.
And was there a split there?
It's definitely a cultural split and some annoyance. And of course, Nikesh was supposedly being lined up as successor. But then Masa suddenly said, actually, I think I'm going to do another few years. And Nikesh was had to go. And I think the Japanese were relieved to see the back of him.
And relieved to see the back of the cash outflow. And
well, $320 million, it's...
Yeah, 80 million a year. I mean, it soon adds up, right?
It certainly does.
I mean, do you think anybody's worth that?
80 million a year guaranteed, unsure.
Because there is that instance I wrote about a few weeks ago about Brian Niccol moving from Chipotle to Starbucks and $27 billion of value being transferred. And it's kind of hard to argue that some of these people aren't worth, I mean, he was paid $100 million, partly the money he'd left on the table. But I mean, I can imagine that in a Japanese context, it just looks ludicrous, right?
It really does. I mean, that people don't earn anything like that. And it's seen as excessive. It's seen as rude. And we haven't really talked about this, but people do look in Japan, the Japanese business establishment, at Softbank and at Masa with great suspicion.
Yeah.
Because what are they making? They're not creating ceramics. They're not doing steel. They're not doing cars. It's not a real thing. It's sort of financial engineering. And that's not entirely fair to describe Softbank, because clearly he did, and I described this in detail, how he created a mobile phone business.
Yeah.
To take on the incumbent NTT. He did buy Vodafone Japan, amazing leverage deal, which turned out fine. They got the exclusive deal to distribute the Apple iPhone, and he created real value. But the story, Stephen, is that bores him. What he really wants to do is be at the tables, investing.
Well, I hope you're enjoying this episode, and if so, you're bound to enjoy our free newsletter on Substack. It's a weekly email I send out each Sunday morning on interesting investing-related topics. Just visit behindthebalancesheet.com and hit that little sign up button on the top right. And while you're there, you should check out our fabulous online investor training school. Hundreds of students have taken our flagship Analyst Academy course, which teaches you everything you need to become a serious equity investor. And if you're a professional investor, we also run a forensic accounting course for institutional clients and a cohort-based course for smaller funds and for serious amateurs. Email me at info@behindthebalancesheet.com for more information.
Yeah, I mean, the iPhone. So I saw him speak at a Goldman Sachs conference in, I think it was 2016. It was an amazing I don't know why they invited me. I mean, they had Michael Bloomberg speaking, Howard Marks speaking, and Masa speaking. He stood up and he talked about the Internet of Things and 1 trillion connected devices. The Internet of Things, I mean, it's not even 10 years ago. I mean, I haven't heard anybody talk about the Internet of Things for quite some time. Well, obviously, if we get autonomous vehicles, they'll all be connected. But this was, the Internet of Things seems to me like you can change the color of your light bulb remotely. Why anybody would want to do that remotely, I don't know. Or why anybody wants to change the color of their light bulb, I'm not sure. But he did this amazing presentation about all this stuff. And he said, I went to California and I gave Steve Jobs the idea for the iPhone. That's what he said in a public forum. I may misrecall some part of it, but in your book, you say he claims to have designed the iPhone emoticons. I mean, do you believe this?
No, I think, Stephen, I went through that chapter I think I rewrote it 8 or 9 times, at least, because I was trying to make sure I didn't libel him. And I was trying to give him some justification, because he's like Ronald Reagan with the Star Wars system. Seeing is believing. He has this vision. He believes it to be true. He believes other things to be true, even if they're not. Now, did he exaggerate? He certainly was close to Jobs, but the idea that he developed or had the concept of the iPhone, I think that's an exaggeration. Did he have the idea of turning essentially the iPods into something else around the iPhone? Yes. But was it the full deal? No. So I think my answer to your question is that he takes 20%, 30% that might be true and then turns it into 120%.
I mean, you won't listen to this. You're safe.
It's okay. I mean, what would you like me to say, Stephen?
No. But his first business partner, Dr. Mosa, who's
Yes.
now 92.
95 now.
95 now. Oh, Craig, that was 3 years ago. He's still going.
And I'm still in touch with him.
And he said he lied and cheated me. I mean, this is not a trustworthy person.
No, and I think I describe it as sort of original sin. I mean, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I must tell you a little story because I went to Berkeley. I haven't told this story, but I thought I was going to find Forrest Mosa, the first business partner. I thought I'd go to Berkeley, find out Masa's academic records. And I was just told, this was just around COVID was just lifting. Well, they're private, so we're not going to give you his academic records. And I didn't hear anything from Forrest Mosa. I'd sent him an email and everything. And I went back to my hotel in the afternoon and I looked at myself in the mirror and just said, "You're a schmuck. I mean, you've got nowhere. You think you're some hotshot reporter. You've got nothing." So I then thought, well, what am I going to do? So I thought, maybe LinkedIn. So I looked on LinkedIn and I found somebody called Todd Mosa, who is in software in the Bay Area. And I thought that must be his son. So I sent him a LinkedIn message. Tom Mosa go back and said, "Oh, I thought my dad had got in touch with you." And I said, "Can you give me Forrest Mosa's telephone number, his home number?" So I rang up. "Hello?" And I said, "Hello, it's Lionel Barber. I'm the former editor." And I got it. "Oh, I thought I sent you an email." No. I said, "Well, can I come round?" He said, "If you come round," he said, "before you come round, give me 2 words to describe Masayoshi Son." And I thought, I better get these right, otherwise no interview. So I said, "Can I have 4? And he said, "Yeah, sure." So I said, "Would-be visionary, reckless gambler." And there was a silence on the phone. He said, "How about just crook?" Because he felt that Masa had gone behind his back and sold the rights to distribute the speech synthesizer to Japanese companies without his permission. He was selling chips, national semiconductor chips that didn't exist at prices he'd invented. Now, when I put this to Masa, he was a bit embarrassed and he just said, no. It was just a misunderstanding. And, so there is that's quite a revealing story, actually. And I think I'm on solid legal grounds here.
His private company, MIC, went into liquidation in 1998 with liabilities of $107 million. This is like 18 months before he's the richest man in the world.
Is that MIC or MAC?
Oh, I don't know.
He had 2 private companies.
But one of them went into
He
liquidation.
did, yeah.
What was that all about? I mean,
this is, again, it's very complex. I got into this through my researcher. I had a Japanese Korean researcher. And we found the original, some of the original filings, and he was using his private companies to essentially warehouse part of the loss-making acquisitions that he'd made in the United States. So investors were not getting the full picture. Now he would say, "Well, these were my companies; they're separate," but of course, was there a relationship between the private companies and the publicly listed company? Were they using collateral, shares from the publicly listed company to try and use them to borrow? And also the MIC was used for the giving out shares to his employees. So it was exposed. There were whistleblowers, which again nobody's written about for 25 years. We looked at the original Japanese, and the funny thing is that the same kind of problems arose 25 years later with this crazy NASDAQ whale story where Masa had his own in-house hedge fund and he was trading himself alongside Softbank and the North Star. Crazy.
The thing that puzzles me with that is in the UK, if you're the director of a private company goes bust, then you've got a problem being director of anything, let alone a major public company. And you imagine that in Japan that would cause enormous loss of face. And I just was puzzled as to why this is. I mean, you've obviously exposed this, it's been swept under the carpet until now. How's he managed to keep a lid on all that?
Well, one reason, Stephen, is that by 1998, his investment in Yahoo had come good. So suddenly something that he'd put in about 100 million was worth, I don't know. I mean, think of the dot-com bubble was going.
Yeah, sure.
So it was worth, I don't know, 3 billion or something. So, and he'd also gone public on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. So it was a big success story. So this was just quietly ignored. He's been lucky on timing.
Well, you do need a bit of luck to build the 200th largest company in the world from nothing. I mean, I'm torn between admiration and shock. Is that? I mean, he's a very polarizing character, isn't he?
That makes two of us. I mean, I felt it was important to give a rounded portrait, and we can deal with the negative bits in a minute. But the fact is, he came from next to nothing. He wasn't quite as dirt poor as he claims. I mean, he did spend his first 3 or so years on the edges of a slum near a railway station in Kyushu in Western Japan. But his father was pretty soon quite rich in the post-war years, and he made his first money, by the way, in pig breeding, and he was a bootlegger. I interviewed his father, by the way, when he was 87 in the family home, and there's this old, gambling casino man, pachinko parlor owner, and he made a lot of money. So Masa was not as poor. He was treated certainly like a princeling, but when he came back from America to Japan, he couldn't get a bank loan because he was Korean. So you have to say, if you think where he came from, and he went into a new business of software distribution, it's a pretty amazing story. On the other hand, he's reckless. He's destroyed value. He is very creative. There are people quoted in the book, Bill Gates, Bobby Kotick, who sold his company Activision Blizzard to Microsoft for, I don't know, what was it, more than 50 billion, I think. 68 billion, I think. I mean, Bobby thinks that Masa's, a bit mad sometimes, but incredibly creative figure. So there are plenty of people who give him credit. But, I also interviewed Jerry Yang, the co-founder of Yahoo. I mean, Yang's views are, positive, but also, it's a bit off the rail sometimes. And, people straightforwardly have said to me he's addicted to gambling.
And Yang's known him for a long time, of course.
Since 1995, yeah.
So he would have known him the best of all those people.
Well, Bill Gates knew him. I think he first came across him in about 1983 or 2.
Oh, really?
Okay. So Gates is, and I interviewed him for an hour in Sun Valley in 2022, and he spoke very warmly of him. But did Bill Gates put his money in the Vision Fund? No.
The Vision Fund, I mean, it's just like the most bizarre vehicle. I mean, when I read about it, I thought that, the Financial Times usually get these things right. So you trust what it says. I couldn't believe what I was reading. So the first question is, why did he appoint Rajiv Misra, who was a debt structuring guy who'd managed to, he did him a massive favor in getting him the debt that allowed him to buy Vodafone Japan. But, he had no track record, no credibility as a venture capital investor. He wasn't even an equities guy.
Well, the appointment took everybody by surprise. But I think there were a couple of things in play. One is that Masa did owe him a lot for that Vodafone Japan deal. But he also knew that he was looking at Misra for access to capital. And I mentioned that he initially looked at insurance companies, and then he got this money from the Gulf. Well, of course, Rajiv was the man who was partly the introducer to, he was the facilitator for that, because he knew he had this great Deutsche Bank traders network, or people who'd worked there. And therefore, Masa, there's actually a Saudi, Nizam Assam, who was an ex-Deutsche Bank trader who then created a boutique bank in London, and he was very important facilitator, and he knew Rajiv. So I think that was part of the reason. And then the other was, look, Rajiv knows a lot about leverage. And as you said, Softbank Vision Fund was a leverage play as much as it was some, investment play.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like completely the wrong structure. I mean, if you're investing in cash-hungry businesses, the last thing you want to do is promise your investors a dividend on half the capital. I mean, it just makes no sense.
Well, he had to do that. Was the price of getting the capital, was to assure them that they would have that coupon of 7%.
But they were getting coupon out of their own capital. I mean, it's just nonsensical. I mean, this is what amazes me. So he starts off, he thinks he's going to raise $20 billion. He goes to Qatar, he gets nothing, and he comes out and says, I'm not shooting high enough. I'll go for 100. And he almost got $100 billion. He must be the world's best salesman.
He's an amazing salesman. And I think one of the reasons is that he's very good at the kind of why not question. It's a seduction, but also there's the absolute kind of confidence that he projects, and he's got in his back pocket, I'm the guy who invested in Alibaba. I mean, he always has that in his pitch deck. But the other very important point is the coincidence of interest, where you have a new ruler, de facto ruler in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and he wants to get access to technology companies, and he wants to be the great modernizer. And he's got money because he's got he's created, he has the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the PIF. He's also got Saudi Aramco that he's going to sell some shares in that, the IPO. So, and he wants to modernize his country at pace. And so Softbank, which was promising, by the way, to be involved in many different aspects, not just bringing technology companies to Saudi Arabia, but also helping on the design of NEOM, the new city, all this stuff. There was a coincidence of Masa needing the money and Mohammed bin Salman wanting to be the modernizer.
I wonder what he said in that 45-minute meeting to emerge with $45 billion.
He made a lot of promises about what he could bring. By the way, the Saudis were really irritated by Masa's later interview with David Rubenstein, the ex-Carlyle boss, when he said, I got 45 billion out of them in 45 minutes, because it made it sound like Saudi dumb money.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because that's an incredibly rude thing to do.
Yeah.
Because it just makes the guy look like an idiot. He's given you $45 billion and you didn't even try. And why would you do that to your biggest investor? I mean, it made him look smart, but it was a very short-sighted comment. And Rubenstein didn't coax it out of him. I mean, he was desperate to show how clever he was. That just seems extraordinary to me.
Yeah, he's not good on the emotional intelligence, and he can often be glib. And maybe also sometimes his English, although he learnt it in Berkeley, California, when he was in there as a student in the 70s, it can occasionally go into cliche. I mean, he talked about his inspirational grandmother who was constantly worrying about money. And he just suddenly said, my Jewish grandmother. And you're thinking, God, that's really off pitch. But you're right about it was an insult, in effect, to the Saudi backers. And they really didn't forget it.
And was it a case, do you think, that once MBS had agreed, the minions who were sort of scratching their heads and said, this doesn't look that clever a structure to me, they couldn't sort of reverse the process because it was promised and it was going to be delivered?
Yeah, but he'd mentioned the 45 billion, or a big number, before, and there've been a number of meetings in Japan between the SoftBank people and the Crown Prince's entourage. So it wasn't really a 45 billion in 45 minutes. There's a lot of groundwork done. Where you are absolutely correct is that there were a lot of questions about how the Vision Fund would actually operate. You know, SoftBank already had an investment in Uber. It had Arm Holdings, the British company. How would what say, if any, would the Saudis have over future investments? And what about their investment in Uber? How would that be untangled? How would the governance work? I mean, beyond the coupon of 7%, there were a lot of questions to be answered. And by the way, that led to serious tensions. And it's why, crucially, the Saudis did not invest in the second Vision Fund.
It wasn't because they hadn't made any money.
No, they just said enough, you know. And also the craziness around WeWork, where Masa went for world domination with Adam Neumann. I mean, I talk about that. I have a chapter on WeWork, which is, you think what we've heard so far is crazy? I mean, that's pretty crazy.
But I've read it, and I've read a lot about WeWork, and I still can't imagine what was going through his brain.
Well, somebody said to me, actually it was Rajiv Misra, who I did interview. I mean, he wanted it off the record, and I did largely make everything off the record. But he was a useful source. And, you know, very intelligent man, actually. He made the point that actually WeWork could have made it maybe without COVID. I mean, they had a very interesting business model. He says, "You're laughing."
Yeah.
Well, I wrote it down anyway.
I think it is a joke. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't have survived. I mean, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, but it was not going to have world domination.
But
it was not worth $7.
It would never in a million years have been worth $50 billion.
$50 billion. No.
I mean, just physically impossible. I mean, he would have had to have so much real estate that, I mean, the numbers just couldn't possibly compute. And that's
I'm not going to disagree.
Well, that's what. This is what just astonishes me, and it shows he's kind of a poor judge of character. And when you're a billionaire, usually you're quite a good judge of character, but you haven't got to that point unless you've found the right people to help you. And that's what puzzles me.
Yeah, he's not been good at picking people particular. I mean, Marcelo Clary, who did turn around Sprint, I think was an effective operator, got very handsomely rewarded. But you are right. And I asked someone about this. What's the difference between Masayoshi Son and Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba? And this is a long-time collaborator and top executive at Alibaba, Chinese. And he said the difference is that Jack is really interested in people, and he believes in teamwork and team building. Masa has no interest. He's totally mercenary. He only really cares emotionally about his family. That's what I've heard and I've noticed. He's not so good on the really close entourage. He has certain personal relationships, and he can be generous, but in terms of picking people, I would agree with you.
Because Lex Greensill, I mean, what was that about? I mean, that was just bizarre.
Well, first of all, again, I think the technical term is bullshitter.
Yeah.
He had a new idea. He said it was just like factoring, but, essentially paying bills for people, settling early and then getting a cut later or before. I think again, I've got to choose my words carefully here, but there is a connection between the way in which Greensill had access to capital. That's what interests Masa. And I mean, I've described in Indonesia where they're standing, and talking about financing the new city,
Yes.
Nusantara in Indonesia, and they say this could take tens of billions, maybe 100 billion. And Masa looks at Lex Greensill, he's got the 100 billion. Can you do it? And Greensill says yes.
Yeah, well, he would
He's
say
mad.
he doesn't know how to say no, right?
But as you say, there were the money being given, SoftBank investing in Greensill having certain funds linked to Credit Suisse. Then some of those funds also Masa's involved in. I mean, there's sort of circular financing going on here, and it's highly questionable. There's another deal which I do go into detail on, which is the Wcard investment.
Of course, a subject close to both our hearts, because Dan McCrum has sat in that very seat.
Well, I'm honoured to be in the same seat as Dan. He's a fantastic business reporter, financial reporter, and I worked with him very closely to get that investigation over the line. And Dan exposed with Paul Murphy a scandal, a fraud on the size of Enron in this German payments company called Wcard. Now, what happened? Wcard, we published the stories. Wcard's share price went down. One of Masa's entourage called Akshay Naheta, former Deutsche Bank banker who went on to run North Star, he said, well, we should invest in Wcard. We can put a bond up. We'll get Credit Suisse. Oops, they're back again. They can back it, and we'll then offload the risk, and we can make a load of money. They made 60 million. Now, interestingly, Masa said, I'm not getting involved in that. He didn't get involved with it personally, nor did Softbank on the Wcard deal. But a number of executives did, and they made out handsomely. But, I mean, this was a fraud. It was at least, very opportunistic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, just for the benefit of any lawyers listening and for the avoidance of doubt, I'm not suggesting for a minute that Lex Greensill or Masa Son had done anything wrong in the structuring of their investments, just to make that clear. But it did seem quite an unusual sort of setup. And a lot of these things, because he seems to use leverage at every possible level, which I've always thought was, the mark of a gambler, because he's leveraged in his private life as well, isn't he?
He is indeed. We don't know what level of debts. I've heard all sorts of numbers, running into billions. His personal debts owned to banks, including international banks as well as Japanese banks, and Mizuho being the most important, by the way, lender to SoftBank. But he's always done that. He's always leveraged himself. And somebody said, I think it was one of his close partners said that he really became addicted to leverage after the Vodafone Japan deal. Yeah. Because that was the biggest leverage buyout in Asia at the time. And of course, it did turn out to be a great success. I mean, they securitized, it was whole company securitization. I go into some detail in that, explaining how that worked. It was financial engineering in the Harvard Business School range.
I mean, I was just wondering, you've got a billionaire like that, and I'm not aware. I mean, has he sold a lot of his SoftBank shares, or because he's invested hundreds of millions of dollars in properties around the world? And has he sold stock in order to finance that, or has he borrowed money? Because how else would he finance a $118 million acquisition of a home in California before he's remodeled it?
I don't know the precise details, but I do know he has sold down his stock from time to time, certainly during the global financial crisis, which I describe. And he did say to me he'd almost been wiped out at that time. And he's also certainly borrowed money from the banks on the back of his stock. I think he had around 40%. He's probably got around now 28, 30%, I think is the latest figure. And, based on SoftBank's stock as collateral, he's borrowed a lot of money. And he's not used company money. I think that's really important to emphasize. Not just for his properties around the world, but also his private jet. He says, and his wine, because he loves Romani Latash,
Yeah, that came up a little bit.
Yes, he uses that. I mean, I saw it.
Did you have a glass when you were?
No, he never offered me a glass. I went round his it's amazing private dining room next to his office. I mean, it's gigantic. And people
How many people would sit around the table?
Well, you'd have at least 12 around the table, but then there's the sofas on elevated platforms, and it's a huge room at the top of near the top of the skyscraper in Tokyo, and there's 3 large rock pools in the room. So imagine that.
Inside?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So listen, the book is really amazing.
Thank you.
Well, obviously you're a brilliant journalist, you're a brilliant writer, and you spent years doing this. What's the conclusion? I mean, his legacy, he said he wanted to be remembered for his role in AGI, but he's not invested in AGI. So what's next for Masa Son?
I think he will be remembered as the man who broke out of Japan and became a global figure, who had some spectacular bets which went right, and we talked about Alibaba, and created, helped modernize the Japanese economy around broadband and then mobile, etc. So that stands. The question is, can he get in at sort of level 2 on the AI revolution? And he missed ChatGPT. He didn't get close with Sam Altman. I mean, he didn't get into deep AI when he should have done in around 2020, 2021, which is pretty incredible given he mentioned AI, I think 500 times in presentations between 2017 and 2022. So he's late to this party, relatively speaking. But he still has money. He's got at least $40 billion to spend. And he is making investments in AI-related companies. So I think he's also got ARM, which is this advanced semiconductor manufacturer, a designer. He was reported to be looking to work with Intel, that beleaguered, once fantastic American semiconductor chip manufacturer. And given the importance of advanced chips, given Masa's ability to be a middleman, I think he could be part of that. But the idea, Stephen, that he's going to be in the Meta, Google class, or even the Warren Buffett class, I think that dream has probably passed.
Well, he's not done badly. I mean, you've got to hand it to him.
And nor have shareholders. I mean, if they'd stuck with him through the stomach-churning ups and downs, I think they would have made around double figures, 10%, 11% since 2015. I mean, it all depends on where the market is at the time and when you choose.
Yes, I'm not convinced about the result for shareholders, because what he's effectively done is he's borrowed in depreciating yen at zero interest, or next to zero interest, to invest in tech and other businesses in the United States. And your return from doing that, so if you or I had decided that would be a good idea to do, and we're happy to wear that risk, then if we just invested in the S&P 500 or in a tech ETF, we'd have made, I don't know what the numbers are, but I bet you we would have made more money than Softbank has. And he still hasn't addressed the fundamental issue, which is the stock has consistently traded at a massive discount to the sum of its parts. And you would imagine that would have been the focus of attention, because that's the easiest way of him delivering value to his shareholders, is to close that discount. And he's always gone off in his grand visions, which have caused people to worry, and that's why he's got the discount. But listen, the book's brilliant, and I really appreciate you're taking the time. What's next for you?
Oh, I'm going to take a deep breath, and if there's anybody out there who thinks they could turn this into a movie, The Rise and Fall and Rise of Masa Son, I'm interested in listening to you. I'm certainly going to take a pause on book writing, but I have a Media Confidential podcast. I do some mentoring. I think it's time to put a bit back of that journalistic experience, and I have some advisory work that I do in the States that keeps me global. I'm on also a think tank board in Japan, so advisory council. So I'm still kind of global, and Stephen, there is life after the FT.
And who's going to play Masa Son in the movie?
Oh, well, I'm looking. Can you improve your Japanese?
My Japanese is restricted to konnichiwa, arigato gozaimasu, and that is how we will close. Lionel Barber, arigato gozaimasu.
Arigato.
Lionel Barber was really candid in our discussion, and yet I came away thinking Masa Son remains something of an enigma. He's made some crazy, indeed stupid investments. WeWork, Greensill, Wag, the dog walking app, and many more. Yet his company, Softbank, created from nothing, is around the 200th largest company in the world. His investment in Jack Ma's Alibaba may have been skill or pure luck, but it was still the greatest venture investment of all time. And Lionel Barber is a brilliant journalist, and he's written a fantastic book, which I really enjoyed. I hope this conversation entertained you. Let me know if you'd like more of such interviews. I know lots of you like me to interview professional investors, but I think it's fun to mix it up now and again. Let me know at info@behindthebalancesheet.com, and thanks, as always, for your support. Thank you for listening. I'm Steve Clapham. That was the Behind the Balance Sheet podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And why not visit our website, behindthebalancesheet.com, where you can find the show notes and lots of other videos which can help you on your investing journey. Thank you for watching.